Okay, hi, we are here back to actually recap the other part of reproduction in humans. So, for sexual reproduction in humans, right, first of all, what will happen is the process is more like there's sexual arousement, and then the penis will become erected, and blood will actually pump into the spongy erectile muscles, and semen containing millions of sperm will then be ejaculated into the vagina, where the sperm will swim up the oviduct to reach the egg. So what happens during fertilization? It usually occurs when the sperm that has a haploid number of chromosome N fuses with the ovum also N to form a zygote of 2N, which is a diploid condition. And over here, only one particular sperm will actually meet that fusion. So basically, for fertilization to occur, the sperm had to actually penetrate the egg. And when the sperm actually makes contact with the egg, the acrosome will actually release an enzyme that will help to disperse the follicle cells and breaks down the part of the egg membrane to allow the sperm to actually enter. For fertilization, only one sperm nucleus will enter the egg, and then the haploid sperm nucleus will fuse with the haploid egg nucleus to form a zygote. So for fertilization, as soon as the sperm enters the egg, the membrane of the egg will change such that no other sperm can enter. The sperms that were unable to fertilize the egg will also eventually die off. So what happens? During implantation, the cilia lining, the oviduct, will sweep the fertilized egg towards the uterus, and as the zygote travels along the oviduct, it will undergo mitosis to form an embryo. It typically takes the embryo around 5 days to reach the uterus. So what happens is then this embryo will float freely in the uterus for 2 days before it gets implanted into the uterine lining, and that implantation, what it refers to is the event where the embryo becomes embedded into the uterus lining over here. Development of the placenta. So generally after implantation, finger-like projections called the villi would actually grow from the embryo into the uterine lining, and that these embryonic villi and the uterine lining will make up the placenta. The umbilical cord will then attach the embryo to the placenta. So three things will actually make up the placenta. You have your embryonic villi, the uterus lining, and of course your blood capillaries. So development of the amniotic sac. This sac is generally an membrane that encloses the whole embryo in a fluid-filled space called the amniotic cavity, and that the fluid in this cavity is called the amniotic fluid. The embryo will continue to develop, and once all major organs are formed, it will then be known as the fetus. So the fetal blood system will look something like this, where we could see that it is actually partially permeable for the capillary so that the oxygen and everything can be actually exchanged. Metabolic waste material will actually flow out of the fetus out into the back into the mother's bloodstream, so that the mother can actually remove the metabolic waste generated from the fetus. So the fetus blood capillary are not usually connected to the maternal blood capillaries. This is because the maternal blood can be the blood group can be different from the fetus. So if there is actually a similar blood vessels that allows these two blood to mix, that will actually cause a lot of blood agglutination if they are non-compatible, and inevitably you actually kill both the mother and the kid. Okay, so that's where they are never connected, and therefore the fetal blood capillaries are generally surrounded by the maternal blood spaces. So diffusion of the substances can then occur across the maternal blood spaces. So in the event like oxygen, the fetus need it will actually diffuse from the maternal blood capillaries into the fetus. So the umbilical cord is generally made up of two umbilical arteries and one umbilical vein, where the functions of the umbilical vein is to transport oxygenated blood and food substances from the placenta to the fetus. For the umbilical arteries, they tend to transport deoxygenated blood and metabolic waste products from the fetus to the placenta. So the amniotic sac will enclose the fetus in the amniotic cavity, and this contains amniotic fluid. So for the functions of the amniotic fluid, it allows the fetus to move freely during growth. It lubricates the vagina during birth, and of course protecting the fetus against any form of physical injury by absorbing shock. It also helps to support and cushion the fetus, so preventing any form of physical or mechanical injury to it. Okay, finally we'll talk about the sexually transmitted infection. So for this case, right, sexually transmitted infection, STI, also known as your STD, is a disease that actually is spread through sexual intercourse, and this can be caused by either bacteria or viruses. So for viruses, it's very hard to find a cure, whereas for bacteria, through the course of antibiotics, you could actually kill off these bacteria. So these STIs can be transmitted from an infected person to an uninfected person via the semen or fluid in the vagina and blood. So AIDS is an example of STI, and this is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, the HIV. The HIV will destroy the body's immune system, and a person infected with AIDS is not able to produce sufficient antibodies to protect his or herself from other infection. And in this case, right, the infection that are normally mild may result in fatal for a person with AIDS. So what this means is that actually the HIV virus will tend to kill off your white blood cells, okay, lymphocytes, phagocytes, and in a sense, it weakens your own body's immune system. And when let's say another disease comes in, doesn't have to be STI related, attacks your body will not have that strength in the immune system to fight off this infection. Hence, you will actually be killed off by the infection due to a lack of immune bodies. That is a result of your STI HIV that lowers the immune system. So some of the symptoms of AIDS, you have severe diarrhea that may last for months. You have pneumonia, you have chronic fever, widespread of tuberculosis, brain infection, and Kaposi's sarcoma. So all these you can actually slowly Google and find out more. But more importantly is the modes of transmission of AIDS through unprotected sexual intercourse with an infected person. It can be passed from mother to fetus during pregnancy, blood transfusion with blood from an infected person, or sharing of hypodermic needles with an infected person. So these are the different examples or avenues of mode of transmission of AIDS. Now, how do we go about prevent HIV infection? This may come out as an essay question. Do not have sex. That means you practice sex abstinence. Keep to one sexual partner. Use a condom when actually having sexual intercourse. Do not abuse drugs, as what happens is drug addicts may tend to share needles, and these needles may not be sterilized. And so anything that let's say one of the drug addicts actually is tested for HIV positive, and they'll share the needle with them. There's a chance that this lead to a transfer of your exchange of blood fluid may result in you actually getting the HIV. So make sure that the needles used in acupuncture, ear piercing, or even tattooing are all sterilized. And do not share any instrument that can break skin and get contaminated with blood. Example, like razor and toothbrush. Yep, and that is all for this chapter. You can go and read through again to get a better understanding. This is actually a very content-heavy chapter, so you may need some time to think through. Thank you.